Okay, mystery initiations. It's a topic which conjures up lots of magical images for us, doesn't it? Perhaps the most potent we know about is the ancient Egyptian mysteries. But what exactly are initiations, and are they still relevant in the 21st century? So firstly, what do we mean by the words initiate or initiation? Well, the word initiate has several definitions, but most generally, these are to set going by taking the first step, to introduce to some art or knowledge, to admit somebody into membership, as with a ritual or a ceremony. And therefore a person would be considered someone who has been initiated. Alice Bailey stated in her book, Discipleship in the New Age and Initiation, Human and Solar, that the word initiation is derived from the Latin in, meaning into, and ere, to go. Hence, denotes making a beginning or entering into something. So we can see that this is perhaps a milestone, an act that demarks one stage from another, an entry or progression into the spiritual life. Annie Besant defined it thus. She said, "Now what does this initiation in the mysteries mean? Quite frankly, it means an expansion of consciousness. Initiation itself is a certain series of events through which man passes, actual events and experiences, taking a certain amount of time. Not a vague, indefinite series of feelings, but actual communications and thoughts and actions gone through by man out of the physical body in the presence of a great assembly of the masters. The result is that the man becomes conscious of a new world, as though some great new sense had been given to him, which opened to him a new world surrounding him. As a man born blind might know the world of hearing, taste, touch, but if his eyes were opened, would see a new world he had not dreamed of, stretching around him on every side. So it is with the man who, having passed through great ceremony of initiation, comes back into his body, into the mortal world of men. Another world is around him now, a new phase of consciousness belonging to him. He sees where before he was blind. He knows where before he only hoped or guessed." So we have a look at some mystery schools, because the most common pathway to initiation throughout history was through the various mystery schools. All the ancient mystery traditions had initiations, ranging from the Egyptian, Greek, Chaldean, Roman, Christian, Indian, and so forth. Some well-known initiates in history bring us forth names such as Socrates, Plato, Pythagoras, Plutarch, Cicero, Umbilicus, and from the Christian era, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, and Ammonius, the teacher of Plotinus. H.P. Blavatsky tells us that both Pythagoras and Plato were initiates, but interestingly, she said that Plato's pupil Aristotle was not an initiate of the mysteries. The name mystery itself originated from the Greek word maion, which means to close. It refers to the closing of the lips to maintain secrecy of the initiation rites. Violation of the pledge of secrecy in the old days was punishable by death. This injunction not to divulge has been so effectively carried out that today there are no known writings left behind about inner rites of the mystery schools. However, some wrote on the fruits of such initiation. Plato, for example, quotes his teacher, who is also an initiate, saying that one who is initiated into the mysteries becomes truly perfect. Clement of Alexandria speaks thus of the mysteries: "Here ends all teachings. One sees nature and all things." Helena Blavatsky wrote, "The mysteries were in every country a series of dynamic performances, in which the mysteries of cosmogony and nature in general were personified by the priests and the neophytes, who enacted the parts of various gods and goddesses, repeating supposedly scenes or allegories from their respective lives. These were explained in their hidden meanings to the candidate for initiation and incorporated into philosophical doctrines. Mystery schools were scattered throughout Egypt and the Mediterranean. Places such as Eleusis, Thebes, Cyprus, Crete, Tyre. The Egyptians had mysteries of Isis and Osiris. The Middle East Jews had their schools, particularly amongst the Essenes and the Druze. Christianity was also much influenced by the mysteries. Dean William Ing wrote that Catholicism owed to the mysteries, that the notion of secrecy and symbolism, of mystical brotherhoods, of sacramental grace, and above all, the three stages of spiritual life: ascetic, purification, illumination, and epopeia, the crown, which is the final initiation rite, and the Eleusinian mysteries. Freemasonry is also a descendant of the mysteries. If we take a look at Egypt, which is a fine example of initiations and initiates, they start with the lesser mysteries. Into these were initiated the average priest, the typical pharaoh amongst others, even high-born or powerful nobles, who it may have been hard to deny. The progressive admission of a disciple or aspirant into degrees in an esoteric school or organisation is often accomplished by initiations. And the Greek mystery schools, they were divided into lesser and greater mysteries. And there were 3, 5, 7 or even 10 degrees, varying according to the school. And of the greater mysteries, the most important Greek mysteries schools were the ones in Eleusis, in Attica. It was celebrated every year around September or October, around the autumnal equinox. It was preceded by purification rites in Agria, called the Lesser Mysteries, which took place around February or March. The Eleusinian Mysteries itself were held for 9 days and are considered the greater mysteries. All greater initiations were performed during full moons. The famous Roman orator Cicero wrote of the Greek mysteries. Though Athens brought forth numerous divine things, yet she never created anything nobler than those sublime mysteries through which we have become gentler and have advanced from a barbarous and rustic life to a civilized one, so that we not only live more joyfully, but also die with a better hope. Turning to Egypt now, Geoffrey Hodson tells us that in the neighbourhood of the Temple of the Sphinx was one of the most deeply occult regions in the whole of Egypt. A great deal of recruiting to the ranks of occultists went on, and Egypt was a veritable nursery for adepts. The climate was nearly perfect. The lesser mysteries offered both a perfect shield and protection and a channel for communication to the outside world, especially for the artist, the priesthood, and the royalty. Into the mysteries the adepts drew selected people and nursed and trained them, and many of the greater leaders and helpers in more modern times owe their faculty to the schooling given in ancient Egypt. In his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, Manly P. Hall describes a little of the Great Pyramid and what lay within for the candidate. And this is a little bit lengthy, but really worth hearing. Through the mystic passageways and chambers of the Great Pyramid, past the illumined of antiquity, they entered its portals as men. They came forth as gods. It was the place of the second birth, the womb of mysteries, and wisdom dwelt in it, as God dwells in the hearts of men. Somewhere in the depths of its recesses there resided an unknown being who is called the Initiator, or the Illustrious One. robed in blue and gold and bearing in his hand the sevenfold key of eternity. This was the lion-faced Hierophant, the Holy One, the Master of Masters, who never left the house of wisdom, and whom no man ever saw, save he who passed through the gates of preparation and purification. It was in these chambers that Plato, he of the broad brow, came face to face with the wisdom of the ages, personified in the Master of the hidden house. Who was the Master dwelling in the mighty pyramid, the many rooms of which signified the worlds in space? The Master whom none might behold save those who had been born again. He alone fully knew the secret of the pyramid, but he has departed the way of the wise, and the house is empty. The hymns of praise no longer echo in muffled tones through the chambers. The neophyte no longer receives the word of life from the lips of the Eternal One. Nothing now remains that the eye of man can see but an empty shell, the outer symbol of an inner truth, and men call the house of God the tomb. The technique of the mysteries was unfolded by the sage illuminator, the master of the secret house. The power to know his guardian spirit was revealed to the new initiate. The method of disentangling his material body from his divine vehicle was explained, and to consummate the magnus opus, there was revealed the divine name, the secret and the unutterable designation of the supreme deity, by the very knowledge of which man and his gods are made consciously one. With the giving of the name, the new initiate became himself a pyramid, within the chambers of whose soul numberless other human beings might also receive spiritual enlightenment. In the king's chamber was enacted the drama of the second death. Here the candidate, after being crucified on the cross of the solstices and equinoxes, was buried in the great coffer. There is profound mystery to the atmosphere and temperature of the king's chamber. It is of a peculiar death-like cold which cuts to the marrow of the bone. This room was a doorway between the material world and the transcendental spheres of nature. While his body lay in the coffer, the soul of the neophyte soared as a human-headed hawk through the celestial realms, there to discover firsthand the eternity of life, light and truth, as well as the illusion of death, darkness and sin. Thus, in one sense, the Great Pyramid may be likened to a gate through which the ancient priests permitted a few to pass towards the attainment of individual completion. It is also to be noted, incidentally, that the coffer in the king's chamber be struck. If it be struck, the sound emitted has no counterpart to any known musical scale. This tonal value may have formed part of that combination of circumstances which rendered the king's chamber an ideal setting for the conferment of the highest degree of the mysteries. Geoffrey Hodson describes these same mysteries in his diary called Light of the Sanctuary. He describes his own visions or clairvoyant visions of the past, looking far, far back into ages past. He wrote, It was the temple of Khonshu at Karnak, Luxor in Egypt. The Hierophant position and office was seated in the south as Amun, with Khonshu at east and Mut at west. These offices being fulfilled by highly evolved Egyptians, especially the Hierophant himself. The temple was lighted by oil flares and saucer-like lamps about 7 feet high above the ground. The north was unoccupied, and this was the entrance. The colour of vermilion was predominant, and the colours used, blue next, and much white and gold. The officers wore uri of the rearing cobra, and were seated on the cubical thrones raised some 18 inches above the ground. The altar was on the line between Khonshu East and Mut West. The candidate took vows kneeling at the altar and then stood before the Hierophant, who descended from his throne, and with a rod of power, with a rather complicated head, including the towel, initiated the healing figure with a very powerful ceremonial, and touching the crown of his head, brought high occult power, atmic, I think, down into his brain and heart. He fell unconscious on the ground and was laid in the form of a cross upon one of wood. Out of the body, the consciousness was raised to and functioned readily at the causal level, thus being the objective of the degree and not the Buddhic. At once, the candidate knew that the named gods were only personifications of divine powers, particularly as they functioned at the causal level. The words I heard were kingly, Atma, in action under Masonic direction, queenly, Buddhi, similarly, and higher manas, all functioning in the creation and management of the universe and planet. The forms disappeared to be replaced with mighty and tremendous currents of energy, differently coloured as they operated and became visible to the candidate causally. This was the primary goal of the Egyptian mysteries, namely causal consciousness, in which all symbols and personifications disappeared to be replaced by the intelligently functioning powers throughout all nature. In other words, symbols were known for their true significances and not as realities in themselves. There are two rows of members, one behind the other, behind the three sides of the temple, all being very reverent and deeply moved. And there are clouds of incense which is kept burning. Sistra and some musical sound follow profound utterances. The heart chakram is the chief objective for opening, and the knot made by the two figures in the symbol of union represent the knot of ignorance, meaning restriction to lower manas only, which initiation releases, thereafter freeing the candidate from that limitation. The mysteries were a highly privileged and selective institution. The candidate was brought back slowly to waking consciousness. The full memory of realizations was preserved, and somewhat dazed by the elevation, he was most carefully disrobed of ceremonial insignia, seated for the closing ceremony, and then led, shepherded indeed, to his boat at the outside of the first portal, and still in a dream, as it were, taken to his home, where he almost immediately went to sleep for a long time and received further guidance. Today, mystery schools still exist, but some are hidden from the watchful gaze of the profane. Some are more in the form of what we know, such as the esoteric school, in which some theosophists belong. There is co-Freemasonry and Rosicrucian amongst others. All teaching and inspiring seekers are of the wisdom and light. Mr. Hodson tells us that Jesus was an initiate of the greater mysteries, and his disciples were men and women chosen by him and prepared for initiation. He himself constituted a mystery school and instigated a mystery school. He visited his disciples for many years afterwards and revealed even deeper mysteries to the elect. It is said that Jesus achieved the fourth initiation during this lifetime and gained the fifth, full adeptship, in the following life as Apollonius of Tirana around the 1st century AD. Still further, there are great ones banded together in powerful centres throughout the world. For example, amongst the great Adept Brotherhood, we hear mainly about those who reside and have ashrams in the Himalayan regions. But they mention there are other major adeptic centres, including Luxor, Hungary, Tibet, and the Brotherhood of Yucatan. So we turn now to a life leading towards entering the stream. According to German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, humanity would find itself at a major crossroad just after the 19th century. Either humans would discover a new way to be, or they would be overtaken by disaster as he saw it. These were our only choices. Whichever each of us chooses, that is what we choose for the entire human race. We and we alone are responsible for what happens in our daily lives and for what happens globally. He said there were no longer scriptures and authorities to appeal to, as there were in the past. Here Nietzsche is voicing the tenet we understand in theosophy, that humanity is one. So when one rises, we all rise. When one falls, we all fall. We can also see this breakdown in authority as a place to go when we gaze into the world and see the decreasing hold that religion has on people across the planet. Authorities such as politicians, kings, corporate leaders, etc., are a little bit more distrusted or skeptically viewed nowadays. There has in fact so much been a misinformation or disinformation around that humanity must start to develop and rely on the individual's discriminative faculty, which is a growing of the Buddhic nature in humanity. Jiddu Krishnamurti also tells us about this in his little book, That Gem at the Feet of the Master. This is all part of the transformation of the human being into something more. Friedrich Nietzsche calls it transforming into a Superman. HPB talks of the masters of the wisdom, who are supermen and women, and that they have risen above the rank and file of common humanity to leave behind such things as selfishness, fear, pride, materialism, personal bias, etc. They reside in the seat of the real self, utilising the physical body only as a tool and as a way of expression for the higher self in this physical world. How did they get there? In this multifaceted dimension, a conscious union with the monad. This is an intriguing question. They had to climb every laborious rung of the ladder, just the same as we are doing. Perhaps they started earlier, or perhaps they tried harder. Whatever the case, we all travel at different speed, but the journey took them to the heights of evolution in this planetary chain. Along the way, they too had a guide or guru assisting them. When the pupil is ready, the teacher will come. This is a theosophical maxim. A guiding hierophant will have helped them through the earlier initiations, but at some point, the aspirant stands completely alone and must travel the last weary way to the top alone. It reminds me of the poem by Christina Rossetti. Does the road wind uphill all the way? Yes, to the very end. Will the day's journey take the whole day? From morn to night, my friend. The traversing of the path, as it is called, is not an easy one. It takes many, many lifetimes of effort. As in nature, things grow naturally and nothing comes from nothing. The spiritual effort applied has its rewards and progress is made. Yes, slippages along the way happen for all, but for every time the aspirant gets knocked down, they get back up, not overly disheartened, but eager to step forward again. The ways are well enough known here not to repeat it in depth. Self-transformation, meditation, service, know thyself, all that aids us to move forward. The task of human purification and regeneration, so we can know who we really are, the immortal soul, and what is our purpose, answering the fundamental question of why am I here? This long journey is described well in a poem by Madame Blavatsky that was found in a desk after her body died on the 8th of May in 1891. These are some of the most inspiring words written by her. There is a road steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. I can tell you how to find those who will show you the secret gateway that opens inwardly only, and close fast just behind the neophyte for evermore. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onwards, there is a reward past all telling, the power to bless and save humanity. For those who fail, there are other lives in which success may come. For incalculable ages, we stagger through the dark until we get to that point in a single life, but a point that we have been building up to for many lives, where we have turned to the light, made the effort and purified the bodies enough that we are taken note of. Our strivings have earned us the right to knock on the door and demand entry. It is from here that I'd like to proceed a little bit further with. We'll look at the initiations according to Theosophy. So, what is initiated? In Mr. Hodson's book, The Initiate Life, initiation is described as a profound spiritual and psychological regeneration, a result of which a new birth, a new beginning, and a new life are entered upon. Many of those associated with mystery schools are in the ranks of the Theosophical Society, Geoffrey Hodson said, as the thousands of students, disciples, and initiates of the sanctuaries of the past who will come into incarnation in the immediate future will find both a philosophical and spiritual home already prepared for them, and within a source from which they can renew their knowledge in their new brains, and efficient organisation through which they can fulfil the egoic mission as laid upon them by their occult seniors. A question often asked is, am I initiated? And if so, why don't I remember it? Well, there are several factors involved here. Firstly, it's not the personality, the person of the material world, that it is initiated. It is the ego. This brings up the matter of us being able to bring into waking consciousness things that happen on other planes, spiritual planes. We usually cannot, because we have not achieved that link between higher and lower that allows such experiences to be remembered by passing through our atomic web. That thin film which separates us from other planes, such as the astral world, and without it we would be subjective to hallucinations, see horrible astral entities, and possibly endure possession. Damage to the atomic web can be caused by excessive use of alcohol and drugs and things of that nature. The person who can pass through this web in full consciousness is indeed an advanced person. However, should someone be required to know that they have been initiated, then their adept masters will always find a way. In many cases, Geoffrey Hodson himself was used as a method whereby students and initiates were told of their advancements, always privately, of course. Geoffrey Hodson, in his book, Initiations in the Path, gave us some occultly valuable insights into this matter when he explained the phrase in the Old Testament, in Exodus 19:21. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go down, charge the people, lest they break through unto the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. His explanation of that passage is thus: the frequency at which power or occultly sound, light, and consciousness oscillate at these levels is so high as to be destructive of all forms existing in lower regions. These must be left behind by the ascending initiate lest injury should occur. The individual would be overwhelmed, therefore the lower vehicles are put to sleep during the rites, and the phrase was coined that no man shall see God and live. So how do we know when we are approaching the path and the initiations? One of the masters wrote, when a person joins the Theosophical Society, I look at them. A further natural question might arise as to whether one may have already been superphysically in the presence of a master and perhaps taken steps, initiation for example, and yet be physically unaware of such a privilege. In reply, it is understood that under karma, the adepts always ensure the ultimate transference of such knowledge as would be appropriate and helpful according to the circumstances of physical life. Although the abstract and concrete mental level of consciousness are more directly concerned, the effects of occult ministrations gradually become transferred through the mental to the emotional parts of the human constitution. The receipt of the information by the physical brain and the waking state depends, however, upon both its responsiveness to spiritual influences and the demands of daily life, including responsibilities to those in close relationships. Developed characteristics of wise discrimination, steadiness and reasonableness are most carefully considered. And with these and other factors in view, all aspirants may be fully assured that knowledge of occult advancements is at a suitable time made physically available. So we turn now to cheerleadership and probation. You may have heard of these terms, but what are they? Well, cheerleadership is an educational as well as a probationary stage, and the cheerleader alone can determine whether it shall end in adeptship or failure. All persons who desire to come into the circle of the adepts must undergo probation. In letter number 10 of the Mahatma letters, it says, no one comes into contact with us, no one shows a desire to know more of us, but has to submit to being tested and put by us on probation. The purpose of probation is to draw out one's inner nature and conquer it. Letter 92, the Mahatma letters, explains, we allow our candidates to be tempted in 1,000 various ways, so as to draw out the whole of their inner nature and allow it the chance of remaining conqueror, either one way or the other. It is interesting to note that in the case of ordinary individuals, the karmic burdens, sins and weaknesses are distributed generally throughout the life. But in the case of the aspirant, they're concentrated during the period of probation. The aspirant must guard against self-personality, vanity and conceit and one's higher principles, for they are enormously more dangerous than the same defects inherent in the lower physical nature of man. These qualities are the breakers against which the causes of cheerleadership in its probationary stage is sure to be dashed to pieces unless the would-be disciples carries with him or her the white shield of perfect confidence and trust in those he would seek out through mountain vale to guide him or her safely towards the light of knowledge. C.W. Leadbeater received a letter from the Master K.H. which said, cheerleaders, from a mistaken idea of our system, too often watch and wait for orders, wasting precious time which should be taken up with personal effort. Our cause needs missionaries, devotees, agents, even martyrs perhaps, but it cannot demand of any man to make himself either. So now choose and grasp your own destiny, and may our Lord's the Tathagata's memory aid you to decide for the best. HPB also tells us of a strange law in occultism, which has been ascertained and proven by thousands of years' experience. As soon as anybody pledges himself or herself as a probationer, certain occult effects ensue. One of the first is throwing outward of everything latent in the nature of the man or woman, his faults, habits, qualities, subdued desires, whether good, bad, or indifferent. You may have heard the word sonship. So we've heard of the adage, when the pupil is ready, the master will appear. As the student is accepted on probation and wins through these earlier trials, he or she will begin to approach the portals of initiation. The master will take the chela into an even stronger union called sonship or son of the master, which is a link not only of the lower mind but also the ego in the causal body, which is enfolded within that of the adept. The adept cannot cut themselves off from the chela as they might have previously done, and which was possible during probation. In Light on the Path, it is written, "My peace I give unto you," and can only be said by the Master to the beloved disciples who are as himself. Any accepted pupil of the Master has the right and the duty to bless in his name, and a splendid outpouring of the Master's power will surely follow his effort to do so. We now turn to the initiations themselves. The first initiation. It should be emphasised that the importance of initiation is not the exaltation of the individual person, but in fact that he or she has become one with the great order, the communication of saints in Christianity, the great adept brotherhood in theosophy. This is called entering the stream. You may have heard of this term, and this is what it means. There's a very wondrous moment in the candidate's spiritual life, as was explained by the Master Kuthumi when accepting a pupil some time ago. He said to him, "Now that you have attained the immediate goal of your aspiration, I would exhort you at once to turn your attention to far greater requirements of the next step. That for which you have now to prepare, the entering upon the stream, which the Christians call salvation, will be the salient point in the long line of your existences, the culmination of 700 lives. Ages ago, by individualization, you entered the human kingdom. In a future, which I trust is not remote, you will quit it by the door of adeptship and become a Superman. Between these two extremes is no point of greater importance than initiation towards which you should now turn your thoughts. Not only will it make you safe forever, but it will admit you to that brotherhood which exists from eternity unto eternity, the brotherhood which helps the world. The firstborn is a symbol of the newly initiated man or woman. After the first of the great initiations, which itself marks a passage from one phase of human evolution to its successor, the superphysical vehicles used by the now initiated ego at the mental and emotional levels do not, as formerly, disintegrate after death. The existing causal body is disintegrated, a new one being instantly formed to serve as a vehicle to convey the monad ego through its next evolutionary phase. In addition, those initiates who on the attainment of adeptship decide to retain physical bodies subject them to an occult process of purification and rejuvenation, so that the normal onset of death is delayed. When, however, physical death does occur, certain of the subtler vehicles are materialized to the physical level. This provides the adept with a relatively immortal physical body. Now, about initiations, perhaps in more modern times rather than thousands of years ago. Jeffrey Hodson, in his book The Initiate Life, which is an amazing book on initiation and initiates, he said the external rite is profoundly impressive. The very presence of a number of adepts and the close attention of others not actually present, and of the one initiator himself, produces a tremendous, powerful concentration of spiritual and occult forces. In addition, members of the angelic host, amongst whom the heads of orders of this planet, each representing a Mahadeva or great archangel of the solar system, together with many Arupadevas in attendance, bring in remarkable power and influence of the angelic hosts. The candidate is surrounded by and folded within presence and power of these great beings and shining ones. The candidate's personal vehicles are entranced or asleep, all of them, at the height of the ceremony. This is quite necessary, lest personal traits, habits, and even interests might intrude upon the completely impersonal procedure being followed. The star of the king does shine out, especially at the first initiation, and remains as a kind of receiving and transmitting area in the upper part of the causal aura, and perpetually attuned to the head of the hierarchy himself. When the initiating hierophant pronounces the consecration sentences, he also brings down from levels to which the candidate has not yet attained at all forces and influences which bring about the changes described and link up the monad and ego. As mentioned before, at this first initiation, the causal body vanishes as one focuses oneself in the Buddhic vehicle, and the initiate need not descend lower than this again. It appears that most do, however, as they still have work to do and karma to discharge. As soon as the consciousness is brought back down into the mental plane, the causal body reappears. The finest thread connecting the two now become a funnel between Buddhic and causal, and it widens considerably. Later on, the causal body is enlarged by the inrushing of forces. At the first initiation, the initiate now experiences a wonderful expansion of consciousness. They begin a new life. We speak of a new birth. The initiate begins to lead a new life as a little child, the life of the Christ, the Buddhic or intuitional consciousness, which is born within the heart. This gives them access to fields of Buddhic consciousness that some teachings require and cannot be achieved at lower levels. Step by step, he or she must win to higher subplanes within the Buddhic through toil and effort. The new causal body becomes a positively charged vehicle, and its range of radiance is greatly enlarged, and it is surrounded by a discharge from the whole of its surface of a fine but brilliant outrush of particles. At the point in the ceremony when the star of the initiation appears, a line of dazzling light extends from the star to the heart of the candidate. Under the influence of that tremendous magnetism, a tiny silver star of consciousness, which represents the monad in the candidate, swells in a glowing brilliancy until it fills his or her causal body. And for a wonderful moment, the monad and ego are one, even as they will be permanently when adeptship is obtained. On this occasion, the monad identifies itself for this time with the fraction of it that is ego, and it is the monad which takes the vow. This wonderful expansion of the initiate's consciousness is what people speak of as a new birth. Just mentioned, he or she now also has the power to give blessings of the brotherhood, a tremendous and overwhelming force which they are able to give or send to anyone as they judge to be most appropriate, because the power of the brotherhood now flows through them also. The benediction given by the officiant at initiation means. I bless you. I pour my force and benison into you. See that you in turn constantly pour out this goodwill upon others. There are certain other parts of the ceremony where things specific to the candidate are dealt with and advice given to the candidate. In times of old, the ceremony may have taken several days because candidates had to be instructed in astral work. But nowadays it takes in general less than 6 hours all up, perhaps 4 hours. In Masters in the Path it says, there is only one initiator, but in the case of the first and second initiation, it is open to him to deputize some other adept to perform the ceremony. Though even then the officiant turns and calls upon the Lord at the critical moment of the conferring of the degree. Again, note, the initiate uses the same superphysical bodies, astral and mental, from here on in. They are not reformed at each new incarnation. When the physical body dies, the fivefold human persists as a unit of consciousness, all five principles being reincarnated in the new physical and etheric body. The initiatory process between the first and the second is for many the worst time of distress and difficulty, realization of problems, and the constant effort to clear oneself. Temptations must be resisted. The initiate must do battle with life experience and the effects of anger, despair, and desire. On the second initiation, this takes place in the lower mental world. The key of knowledge is now given. This is a time where it is most dangerous and where falls can and do happen. This is the stage called the baptism of the Holy Ghost in fire. The intellect expands greatly at this stage, and also the siddhis are required if not already. It would be impossible otherwise to assimilate the knowledge which must at this stage be given, or to do higher work for humanity. The emotional nature is also purified within the aura of the disciple. A growing impersonality occurs as a result of a growing impersonal view of life, where the focus is that which is good for the whole rather than the smaller self. This growing detachment does not lead to a cold individual because their love for all grows in a widening sphere. However, to some it may appear so. The three fetters which must be cast off at this stage are delusion of self, doubt or uncertainty, superstition. The power to function freely in the mental, via the use of the mental body, must be acquired by a candidate for the second initiation, because that initiation takes place on the lower mental. We now look at the third initiation. Up to the third initiation, man has been occupied with the process of fusing soul and body into one unity. After the third, man is orientated towards and becoming preoccupied with a further fusion into consciousness, that of spirit, soul, body. The third initiation taking, the initiate is called he who does not return, and it is expected that the next initiation will be taken in the same lifetime. The third initiation is symbolized by the transfiguration of the Christ. It is one that is primarily the quickening of the lower mental body, and the causal body is therefore especially developed. He or she is called Son of Mind, the arcane title which alludes to the fact that the soul is the offering of the universal mind. The ego is brought more closely into touch with the monad and the ray it is on, and it is transfigured in truth. The lower mind no longer becomes an unbridled steed, now under the guiding control of the soul. The two fetters cast off here, all enjoyment of sensation typified by earthly love and all possibility of anger and hatred. Whilst the person may still feel the attraction of what is pleasant or beautiful, or repulsion for what is the opposite, they will not be swayed by such things in the fulfillment of their duties. We know that pure love never dies. It only widens, embraces all, rather than a select beloved few. Jeffrey Hodson tells us that initiates vary, and whenever two particular conditions exist, the preparatory ceremonies are less necessary. One of these is full response to the more or less private assistance given by the adept guru. And the other is, of course, the historical fact that the candidate has passed through at least the preparatory rites, if not the full ones, in former lives. If a person has taken the third initiation and advanced towards the fourth in former lives, then in this one he or she will be able to consummate arhatship and begin the preparation for the asika rite. These preparations are many and include worldly experience and physical illumination with Buddhic consciousness gradually until the highest is reached. Then the monad itself takes over the function of all gurus, and preparation rites, and in effect at least takes the arhat out of the human into the adept state and kingdom of nature. That is why he is called the self-initiated one. The fourth initiation. Death is a characteristic of the fourth initiation, not only of the lower self, but the death of the illusion of separated selfhood. During the fourth, the initiate experiences Avicii, a region of icy cold, silent death termed the waveless, that which is without vibration. Even experienced from a moment, it is stamped upon consciousness forever. And there are two basic reasons for this. The first is to be able to sympathize with those in Avicii. In fact, every initiate of certain grades must enter Avicii and try and bring one soul or more back through their own aspiration for self-redemption. This is described in the book of Job 38:17. Have the gates of death been opened unto thee? Or hast thou seen the door of the shadow of death? The affirmative answer must be given by the candidate. And it is here they stand cut off from everything external, tested, and realise with utter certainty that they are one with the Logos. When the fourth initiation is reached, the causal body is discarded by the arhat, who has no longer need of it. When he or she wishes to come down to the mental plane, then they can manifest one, otherwise they do not need it. This initiation is indicated by suffering in the Garden of Gethsemane, the crucifixion and the resurrection of the Christ. It is viewed as a final release because the need to reincarnate is present only when there is unresolved karma stored within the causal body. The Buddhic plane is their home now. Arhatship is considered the halfway point between the first and the fifth initiation. Supposedly we hear from the first to the fourth initiation takes approximately 7 lives. At the fourth, it also takes approximately 7 lives. But it is quite rapid because no heaven life is taken after the physical death. The final 5 fetters have to be cast off during the fourth initiation period. These are desire for beauty of form or physical existence in a form, even including in the heaven world. Desire for formless life, pride, agitation or irritability, the possibility of being disturbed by anything, ignorance. And the fifth initiation, called the Ashika initiation. This sees the adept finally leave the human kingdom. It is called reaching the further shore. The fifth initiation is one where the crown must be placed on one's own head, that of self-initiation. The saying, the adept is not made, but becomes, is very true. This stage takes the initiate out of the human kingdom and into the superhuman kingdom, a master of the wisdom, a full adept. His or her consciousness now resides on the nirvanic level, that of Atma. The ascension and descent of the Holy Spirit in Christianity depicted for this initiation. They stand now ever in the light of nirvana and may retain a physical form or not, as they so wish. When not embodied, they rise even higher into the monadic plane. At the completion of the fifth initiation, there are said to be 7 pathways that an adept can take. One of these paths is staying with humanity and assisting its evolution. Relatively few select this path. Possibly some 60 or 70, Charles Leadbeater said at his time. However, the ranks are always full as new successors occur and replacements are taken up in the hierarchy. Of the higher initiations beyond the fifth, only a little can be said. Of the sixth initiation, it is where the initiate receives the title Chohan. This is a Tibetan word. Chohan simply means Lord. You'll find the head of the 7 rays will be the 6th or higher and bear the title of Chohan or Maha Chohan. There is an interesting passage in the Mahatma letters on Master Kuthumi's initiation. Kuthumi's superior is further mentioned in a letter of HPB's. She wrote, KH or Kuthumi is now gone to sleep for 3 months to prepare during the samadhi or continuous trance state for his initiation, the last but one, when he will become one of the highest adepts. Poor KH, his body is now lying cold and stiff in a separate square building of stone with no windows and doors in it, the entrance to which is effected through an underground passage from a door in Tongting, which is a reliquary, a room situated in every temple or lamastery, and his spirit is quite free. An adept might lie so for years when his body was carefully prepared for it beforehand by mesmeric passes, etc. It is a beautiful spot where he is now in the square tower, the Himalayas on the right, and a lovely lake near the lamastery. His Chohan, spiritual instructor, master, and the chief of a Tibetan monastery, takes care of his body. M. Moira also goes occasionally to visit him. The 7th initiation, one higher still, and we're at the level of 3 wondrous beings. The Manu, whose task it is to look over the physical development of the human race as a whole. The Bodhisattva, or the world teacher, is a position currently held by the Lord Maitreya, known as the Christ, that great being who overshadowed Jesus in his ministry in Palestine, and who was also Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. He is due to take on the role of Buddha when Gautama Buddha vacates it. He looks after the spiritual development of humanity. The third great one we know of at this initiatory level is the Mahachohan, who is responsible for civilizations and culture and is the head of rays 3 to 7. He is the source of one of Theosophy's most well-known pieces of literature called the Mahachohan's letter. It was he who reconstituted the letter sent to Master KH, but he had not read it yet, that the goat had largely eaten up. This little tale can be found in the Mahatma letters. The 8th initiation, the Buddha, Gautama Buddha, is the first of our humanity to take on this role. For the love of humanity, Buddha still has slight contact with this world and does this through the Wesak ceremony. held each year around May in the Himalayan region. You can read these accounts of the Wesak ceremony in the book Masters in the Path. There is also the Prakicha Buddha, one who attains enlightenment without a teacher, called the solitary Buddha. The ninth initiation, now beyond our humanity, is the Lord of the world, the one initiator who conducts the initiations, or they are done in his name. And of the 10th, it's unknown. Perhaps it's a planetary logos or a solar logos itself, who is the ruler of our solar system and its many planets and evolutions. Initiations at this level would affect the whole of humanity. And back to adepts. Some of these stay on earth and take on pupils. These few are what we call Masters of the Wisdom. Masters Moira and Kuthumi are two that have done so, and we know them as the inner founders of the Theosophical Society, although they have a great deal of other work beyond the TS. What are some of the aspects about initiation that occur? Again, we don't know a lot because it is forbidden to disclose its secrets, and these are carefully guarded, but we do glean some insight by studying what has been written down from various writers across the millennia. Full development of psychic powers or cities do unfold, and these are needed upon the journey. Geoffrey Hodgson wrote, when Kundalini touches the spleen centre, it gives to man the power of travelling at will on the astral plane whilst away from the physical body. When it touches and opens the heart centre, the forces of Buddhic or Christ consciousness in the man resides in the vehicle of intuition. If sufficiently unfolded, begin to flow through the neophyte at the physical level, and the mystic rose, the heart chakra, booms upon the breast. The powers of the Christ consciousness, knowledge of the oneness of life, direct intuitive spiritual perception, wisdom, and a profound compassion then begin to manifest themselves through word and deed. The throat centre, when vivified, bestows the power of clairaudience or the responding of superphysical sound vibrations, as well as to those physical sounds which are beyond normal auditory range. The brow centre, when occultly vitalised, bestows the faculty of clairvoyance, and when the coronial chakra is open, the neophyte acquires the faculties of using superphysical awareness while still awake in the physical body, and of leaving and returning to the body at will without any break in consciousness. The full manifestation of these occult faculties during waking consciousness demands a long and arduous training. We're now truly living in a new reality from the one left behind. In summary, we can see from the small exposition of the mystery initiations that the pathway is ever the same from ancient times to today. Mystery schools are still as relevant today as they were in arcane times. However, the outward clothing of them has just taken on a different form. The mystery still exists to help, and the masters and gurus ever ready to guide the serious aspirant when the time is ripe, to hasten the crossing of the stream. When the student is ready, the master will appear. What we have learned is that the hard work, as ever, must be done by the self alone. The credits and debits are also ours alone, from our actions, thoughts, emotions, and willingness to control that most difficult of beasts, the personality. Having done this exceedingly hard work over many lifetimes, leading up to the first initiation, our vista now widens, our powers expand to an extraordinary level, and the further shore becomes beacon-like, closer and closer to our sight. After so many eons, the crown is finally placed upon our own head by our own hands, and in that moment it takes us out of the human kingdom and into the glorious superhuman kingdom of cosmic consciousness. We see the wondrous journey does not end there either. It goes on and on beyond our sight and vision, beyond even that which the great masters of wisdom comprehend. For they too travel the same road, but being a bit further ahead. The cosmos baffles in all its overwhelming grandeur. But for our human sight, the wondrous initiations and the benefit to humanity that accompanies them is firmly within the possibilities of every true seeker. That is an encouraging thought. Namaste.